Welcome to Points of View, a discussion of issues regarding persons with disabilities, moderated by Doug Usiak.
Today's panelists are Dave Whalen, member, New York State Independent Living Council; Susan Sizemore, Executive Director for the Erie County Office for the Disabled; and John Moffat, Director of Strategic Initiatives for Western New York Independent Living.
Welcome. Lately in the news, there's been a lot of situations around the country regarding emergencies, locally, statewide, and otherwise, that people with disabilities have been caught up in. And our discussion today will be about emergency preparedness for persons with disabilities. But when we're talking about people with disabilities, John, and we're talking about emergency preparedness, what type of emergencies are we actually referring to?
Well, the type of emergencies that typically involve a number of people are situations where first responders are really stretched to the limits in terms of what they can deal with. And so when you have situations with flooding or blizzards, as we do often here in Western New York, weather conditions, other types of weather emergencies, or even disaster type of terrorist response, you're dealing with situations where people with disabilities are probably more at risk because of their need for things like transportation and services, which may be cut off at a time like that.
Dave, I guess it's understandable if you're talking about a region-wide flooding or a region-wide snowstorm, but would emergency preparedness include, more specific issues to, the individual settings?
I mean, to play off of what John said, the situations that we're talking about can be something as catastrophic as a hurricane, can be something as specific as a street having just a neighborhood being challenged. So what we're hoping for is prevention through preparedness or a proactive response. So it's more about how we're preparing and ensuring that people with disabilities are both involved in the discussion relative to the preparedness, not just an individual discussion, but a more group discussion relative to a municipality, a county, a township, even statewide. And then from that, their input is going to dictate how that particular response is going to occur, that particular municipality is going to respond.
So what do we consider, Susan, in preparing for emergencies?
Well, I think it's, as Dave said, engaging the people in the community, with the person with a disability, as well as their family members or their employer, their church, their community, the things that they involve themselves in around the community. At Erie County, we recently established a functional needs registry. It's a voluntary registry to let every emergency manager throughout all the different towns and villages throughout the county be able to keep track of who their people are in their community. And we have a form. We came up with some grant money and established these emergency managers a way to ask on a voluntary basis for people to give some pertinent information, and that's put into a database so that if there's a snowstorm or if there's a power outage or another crisis, those emergency managers throughout the county will know who to go to,
Well, that brings
check
up,
on.
That brings up another thought. When you're talking about the emergency preparedness, and people hear a lot on the news, radio, television, or read about it, they talk about FEMA from the federal perspective, and then there's our state issues, and then there are local responsibilities. I mean, is there a division of labor when we're talking about emergency preparedness?
I think it depends on the scope of the emergency. The answer to your question, yes, there is, and it is typically based in terms of the scope of the emergency, in terms of how wide or how much of an area is affected, and at that point, there's a certain there's a level of coordination in our case through the county, but the county doesn't necessarily have Williamsville or Clarence coming out to handle emergency in North Tonawanda or Kenmore, for instance. So yeah, there's a definite hierarchy, and it's often a matter of of how large the emergency is, how many people are involved, and what kind of resources they can pull in to respond.
Yeah, it's definitely a collaborative effort between different municipalities and the county and the Red Cross. The Red Cross is really in charge of the sheltering. The county doesn't do the sheltering. The town of Clarence may not do the sheltering. It's the Red Cross that does that. So it's a community-wide effort that responds to, that should be preparing for an emergency and then responding to it.
And let me follow up from there. I think one of the things that people have a misunderstanding on is that FEMA will be coming to the rescue whenever there is a situation that calls for their presence, and FEMA can only do so much. I was at the FEMA Get Real 2 conference September 12th to 14th at Arlington, Virginia, which was the conference by FEMA to respond to people with disabilities in emergency situations. Administrator Craig Fugate made it very clear. He goes, "We are not the white knight. It starts at your state level, and then from the state level, it trickles into the county level and into the municipality level." So
Are you talking money trickle, or you're talking service trickle?
I'm talking preparedness, really, Doug. I'm not, there is certainly a link to funding that would go across, and those decisions are made from a state level as well, depending on in certain capacities relative to supports. And from a money level, that's where FEMA will find themselves a little more present after the fact. But they also provide supports during an emergency situation. They're ready to deploy, for instance, accessible cots for shelters and medications and wheelchairs that would be necessary in a shelter setting because someone might have lost their chair. But to the point that it's the state's responsibility to work within the structure of their municipality, starting at the county level. So in New York State, we have 62 county emergency services managers or coordinators, whatever their title might be. Their job is strictly emergency management, and they, in working with their statewide association, the New York State Emergency Managers Association, is then supposed to be working with the state, which we hope partners with groups like the New York State Independent Living Council's Emergency Preparedness Committee. So then there's a joint hand-in-hand collaborative effort to be sure that all these initiatives are responded to appropriately.
But Dave, I'd like to also, you looked at the hierarchy from the top up, and I really think we should also talk about the importance of from the bottom, the top down versus bottom up type of thing. And that is that in terms of our own agency, we've taken on an initiative to have people with disabilities who we serve have an opportunity to do their own emergency preparedness. Utilizing some of the Red Cross material, ready.gov, in terms of looking at the individual being able to take care of themselves, either shelter in place or be prepared to move and know what they need in terms of a kit and other kinds of things. And so I think it's critical that organizations that work with people with disabilities like our own, educate their
I'm going to break in
consumers.
right now, and we'll be exploring that, and we'll also be exploring, what is and can we expect that the local municipalities, their role and responsibility in emergency preparedness. We'll be right back after this message.
Today, people with disabilities are participating fully in the social and economic life of New York State. In large measure, this is true because of the work of an independent living center in your community. The New York State Independent Living Council is dedicated to promoting the independent living philosophy and to facilitating access to independent living services. For more information on the council or about your nearest independent living center, call toll-free 1-888-469-7452.
Are you looking for new ideas to help you sell? Need a presentation that must compel? Have a message you wish to dispel? Or an important story you need to tell? Are you exploring new ways to communicate, to motivate, to educate, or demonstrate? Or are you searching for creative concepts to help you entertain, promote your brand name, to effectively train, or launch a new web domain name? Then focus on Creative Concept Studios and see the possibilities.
Welcome back. We're talking about emergency preparedness and the responsibilities of the various local governments when it comes to services and programs for people with disabilities. So the question that I'd like to throw out here is, when we're talking about people with disabilities, we're talking about a lot of different type of functional limitations, people who can't see, people who can't hear, people who can't walk, and medical conditions and all various forms and elements of being prepared for God knows what, can we truly expect that a local town, village, city can prepare and be able to accommodate the number of people with disabilities?
Well, I think knowledge is power, and the more a municipality and emergency manager knows of who is in their community and what their needs are, the better prepared everyone's going to be. I mean, there have been some communities that have a map on the wall. Town supervisors have a map on the wall with push pins, and he knows where every person in his community is that is going to need special assistance in the case of an emergency. Other people have a database. They keep a database up with pertinent information. But knowledge is power, so they have to.
What about, go ahead.
I was gonna say, the only thing I'd be careful of on that, Susan, is that they really don't know where everyone is, and that's one of the big concerns. That we're hoping to address that. But Doug, to your question, and off of John's point from the first segment, it is a two-way street. There is a responsibility from the disability community to educate and provide the information, like the kits, how to respond, who do I contact. If you are interested in being a part of the registry, because the registry discussion could be a whole other segment in and of itself, then we have a responsibility to inform them of that. And your question at the top is, can we really do this? I don't know if we're ever going to bat 100. We're going to have 100%. I mean, I would actually be quite skeptical to say it's going to be 100%. But we're so far behind in the general awareness of what's out there, how to respond. Is a shelter accessible? Is entities like the Red Cross truly aware of what the need to be is respond? Is the disability community truly aware of what they need to do to be prepared? Those are questions that need to be answered, and I think we have a responsibility as disability advocates, as independent living centers, as entities that represent and educate, to make sure that they're aware of what's available and how best to provide that for them.
Yeah, but what kind of programs are out there now that can be utilized, tapped in, or that various municipalities can access? What expertise already exists, or what services are there for people?
Well, knowing the Tonawanda Police Department and the systems that they use, when a 911 call comes in, and if it's someone who is, let's say, has a medical need, and they go to that residence and respond to that, there's usually a patrol car and followed up by emergency medical services, that they document information about that person and that residence, and they keep it in a database, so that if a person uses oxygen, or if they have a history of a heart attack, or if they're a wheelchair user or whatever, they can share that information with the officer en route, so that they have a better sense of preparedness.
Yeah, but if you've identified that somebody has a disabling situation, what's the value of that information? Okay, somebody needs this additional support. Does the first responders get involved with seeing that those services and supports come into play?
Not necessarily get involved in ensuring that that's going to come to play. It starts with their awareness, and in conjunction with, in collaboration, better word, in collaboration with the different groups that could assist on it. It starts with, think about schools. There's the whole special education department in the school district. There's a bunch of children there that can be identified. In our municipality, we are sending out a registry form through all 3 school districts to the parents who can then register their child to be identified. We also then can point them to certain things that exist from, as John alluded to earlier, the kits and the information that's available to be prepared. There's a lot of stuff out there on the website. What we need to do is bring it together so that it's easy to read.
Even if you know that people need help, what good is not having the ability to help if you're in an emergency situation?
Well, I think that organizations respond to the needs depending on, it goes again, based on the resources they have and the needs that's there. I can think of one example. During the October storm, there were a number of people in the town who did not have power, and as a result, their respirators and oxygen generators weren't working. So the town actually got bottles of oxygen from a local company and was providing refills to the smaller cylinders, the portable units, to people who needed them, and was delivering them to their homes. So there was one aspect of a response. But if it wasn't a power outage, if it was some other situation, then that might not have been something that was needed. I think also it gets back to the element of what Dave is involved in, and that is training first responders about the differences of people with disabilities and appropriate ways to respond to situations where they are going to be dealing with an emergency call from a person with a disability.
Yeah, but doesn't that create that whole new process that if you're going to get out and do this training, as you were identifying that if people need oxygen or other type of supports, where's that kind of money coming from?
Well, a couple of things. I'm going to step back a minute, then come back in your question. What we say now, Doug, is excess and functional needs. Accessible and functional needs. Excess and functional needs. We don't say special needs anymore. Excess and functional needs, as developed by the Disability Integration Office of FEMA, better defines what the individual's needs are. So we're not necessarily saying a disability, we're saying a situation that's going to affect my accessible options or my functional needs. So that goes beyond certain disabilities are not necessarily affected during an emergency situation, so we don't want to be general to disability. That said, in moving forward to cost and such, you have a better idea of what your needs may be if this is at least identified. I am aware now that I have to have accessible cots, oxygen backup, how to provide for service animals, so on and so forth, that I wasn't thinking of before. So part of when we say training, we're educating on here's what you need to do to be prepared. You as an emergency management office, here's who's going to help you. That's the other side of the two-way street. We want committees on disabilities within municipalities.
Okay, I'm going to we'll take a break here, and when we get back, we'll talk about what it is that's out there for people to take advantage of right now. So we'll see you right after this message.
Today, people with disabilities are participating fully in the social and economic life of New York State. In large measure, this is true because of the work of an independent living center in your community. The New York State Independent Living Council is dedicated to promoting the independent living philosophy and to facilitating access to independent living services. For more information on the council or about your nearest independent living center, call toll-free 1-888-469-7452.
Are you looking for new ideas to help you sell? Need a presentation that must compel? Have a message you wish to dispel? Or an important story you need to tell? Are you exploring new ways to communicate, to motivate, to educate, or demonstrate? Or are you searching for creative concepts to help you entertain, promote your brand name, to effectively train, or launch a new web domain name? Then focus on Creative Concept Studios and see the possibilities.
Welcome back. We're talking about emergency preparedness and the situation that people with disabilities are facing. And we talked about the responsibility of local, state, and federal government and things to be considered and that have to be considered in being able to provide emergency preparedness. But what do we already have out there today for individuals? And let's start from the person living in their home right now. They have a disability. What can they do in case of an emergency?
Well, the first thing we want to see them do is, it goes back to your kit. What do I need to survive over the next 3 days? And we talk about a 72-hour window. So am I prepared from a medication standpoint, from an oxygen standpoint? Obviously, some basics that anyone would be: food, blanket, warmth, whatever I might need to address during an emergency. But what do I need to survive? So if you have a seizure disorder, which my son does, we need to make sure that we're going to have the medications available over the course of 3 days, and we're not going to run out of that. Some things may need to be refrigerated, So it's that base understanding of what I need to know, so that I will be able to. Someone's charger for a wheelchair, and that goes back to what we talked about with the preparedness from the statewide standpoint and the FEMA standpoint.
Yeah. And so, you see that on the individual basis, a person should prepare for their own particular needs. And John, what do you see as the role of the city or the village?
Well, the city itself, in the town, they do emergency preparedness services. They provide those services. They provide training. As a matter of fact, after 9/11 and also with the Hurricane Katrina, the FEMA established something called Citizens Corps. It was something that came out of the Bush administration. And as a part of the Citizens Corps, they train community volunteers, neighborhood volunteers, in terms of emergency response. In fact, that's the organization that I'm a part of, the Community Emergency Response Team. And we learn about basic things like first aid, firefighting, disaster preparedness, those kinds of things. But the purpose of it is really more in terms of a neighborhood by neighborhood involvement, where there's somebody within the area who, when a situation happens, goes to their neighbor next door or the other people down the street, gets to know them, and becomes a way of a source of communication for first responders, as well as a sort of a comfort and a support in terms of the individual needs. The first role or first responsibility for a CERT team member is take care of yourself, take care of your family, and take care of your neighborhood.
Okay, and Susan, as we go up the ladder, the county, what's the role of the county in all of this?
Well, I think the role of the county is sharing the information, letting, as Dave was saying, an individual and their particular household should be prepared in thinking of, do they need medicine, do they need particular things for their particular son or individual. But it's also knowing the phone numbers to call, knowing who to call for what. Who is your emergency manager in your own particular town? And I think that's what the county is trying to do and has been doing a good job of, is trying to get the information out and let them know, here's who you should call. Here is your emergency manager. Here are the departments in the county that can help you with different things. But it's really, it's more community-based.
Yeah, in fact, to hitchhike on that, it's more effective to call 211 nowadays than it is to call 911.
Yeah,
right.
But if there's a region-wide emergency, I can understand as you build up into that. We just witnessed in Vermont. In fact, I was on vacation the day we left. The covered bridges were all washed out in a matter of a couple hours after we had left. I mean, that went way beyond just a community basis. So, Dave, where do you see you work for statewide awareness and emergency preparedness? What do you see as the responsibility for the state when it comes to emergency preparedness for people with disabilities?
Well, it is a massive role, and to go back on what I said earlier, that is actually where it starts. It does not necessarily start in Washington with FEMA. The state office needs to be responsive. The New York State Office of Emergency Management started a Human Services Committee almost a year ago. We're getting there. We have a lot of progress that still needs to be made. Representation needs to be a little more sound as far as the disability community presence on there, and an understanding of what needs to clearly happen in those particular situations where their role is defined as a support and the presence, working with those county emergency managers and those municipal emergency managers.
Right.
We had some concerns and some issues with Hurricane Irene and what happened in some parts of the state of New York, including New York City, that I think some people got a clear-cut lesson, unfortunately. We don't want lessons after. We don't want it after the fact. The whole thing is about being prepared, not learning after the fact that we weren't prepared and we have people caught in bad situations. So it starts at that level when they work closely with. Susan talked about the registry. Disaster Land, LAN, it's not land, sounds like that. It sounds like a movie, Disaster Land. Disaster Land is a program that actually links the identity through the registry process, the identity of individuals right up through the state, even into Washington, for those that are going to voluntarily fill out the form to identify what their needs are. Those are ways where the connection is immediate if programs like that are truly effective. And again, there's a lot of concerns about the registries being effective, so I want to be careful putting too many eggs in one basket here.
Also, David, the other element is New York State has established programs that trickle down to the individual through New York alerts. You get weather alerts, you can get emergency alerts, you can get road condition alerts that a person can can access through their telephone or through their computer and be very up to date in terms of what's happening within their area, and have a greater sense of whether or not they need to take precautions in order to respond to what might be happening within even like a block by, almost down to the level of block by block. It's gotten to the point where it's small towns and villages as well as counties and regions.
I think the big thing that has to be responded to from that, yeah, John's dead on, great points, is that support from the state level, which is part of what you'd be alluding to, Doug. That support from the state level needs to be there, and part of that support clearly goes back to funding. We have to be careful on when we sit there and feel like we're cutting, because look at the good job I'm doing just because I cut dollars spent, when certain areas dollars shouldn't be cut. And this is certainly one of them where we need to make sure we're respectful of that. I have to say, when I went to the FEMA conference last month, I believe I was the only person representing the state of New York at this conference, nationwide conference, where you had states like Washington who had 20 or 30 people there.
And I'm going to have to stop you there, and I want to thank you all for spending your time with us. And obviously, when it comes to emergency preparedness, there is roles and responsibility for the state, for the county, for the local municipality. But the primary responsibility obviously will be on the person with a disability themselves to make sure they are prepared. Thank you for listening. We'll see you at the next show.
Points of View is presented by the New York State Independent Living Council, Incorporated, in cooperation with the Catskill Center for Independence, Finger Lakes Independence Center, Independent Living of Niagara County, and Western New York Independent Living. For the location of the Independent Living Center in your area, call toll-free 1-888-469-7452.